Hey everybody, my name is Renee Seiler, and this is my type 2 diabetes story. And actually, how I reversed my type 2 diabetes. I was diagnosed in October of 2021. My doctor put me on the highest dose of metformin, which was 850 milligrams twice a day. He also said something about avoiding carbohydrates and, pasta, rice, that kind of thing, and cutting out sugar, but that was about it. Now, having done my own research, I know that it's a little bit more complex than that. My diagnosis came as a surprise to me, although it really shouldn't have. In hindsight, I thought of myself as pretty healthy, but to be honest, I was carrying around an additional 20 pounds that was like kind of all right through my middle. My father had been diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, so I knew that that increased my risk for diabetes. I was approaching 60 years old, and my lifestyle had become quite sedentary. So dutifully, I took my medication twice a day. I changed the way I was eating a little bit. I was never really a big bread, carbohydrate person, but I changed even what I was eating and what I had been accustomed to eating. I cut back on, and I stepped up my exercise. But doing all those things still, while it was enough to lower my medication, it wasn't enough to get me all the way off. And as I dug a little bit deeper into insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes, I started to understand why. One day, as I was getting ready to take my medication, and the metformin is not a small pill, I was like, this is not the kind of life I want to lead. And so I started to do my research. I started with checking out a TED Talk on YouTube. Then I started following a couple of doctors who were talking about insulin resistance, a term that I had never heard of before. But looking at insulin resistance and its role in type 2 diabetes. A lot of the things they said made sense. And so I decided to adopt their approach. My diet wasn't horrible, but it wasn't great either. I was approaching 60 years old. I was eating things like I was still a kid on spring break or something. I needed to make some changes, and they needed to be permanent changes. The trick here, as I learned, is to try to keep your blood sugar levels as stable as possible to avoid these tremendous spikes and crashes. And once I started adopting this new way of eating, which I'll tell you about in just a second, I was able to stabilize those numbers. I know that because I take my I use a blood glucose monitor. I try to keep my carbohydrate intake to between 50 and 60 grams a day, which is very low. I stopped using artificial sweeteners, which studies show can have an effect on blood sugar levels. There was just a study out recently talking about how they're not so great for your cardiovascular health as well. So it was one of those things that I just felt like it's time to get rid of. I use real butter, real eggs, whole eggs, not egg whites, um, avocado and full fat cheese. I don't do anything low fat, and I don't do anything that's artificial either. For exercise, I work out 4 to 5 times a week, about 30 to 60 minutes. I warm up on the treadmill, and then I'll do like either a HIIT workout, high intensity interval training, or a weight workout. Weight training is important for women my age. The more muscle you have, the longer you live. So, and if you're not doing anything, you will atrophy as your muscle atrophies, and you'll turn into a frail little old lady. But muscle also has an impact with regard to diabetes because it helps lower blood glucose. And lastly, I use intermittent fasting. So here's how this works. Daily, I start eating at about 11 in the morning and I stop eating around 7. So that gives me a fasting window of about 16 hours. So I eat for 8 hours and then I'll fast for 16 hours. And then once a week, I do an extra long fast of 36 hours. And so I will stop eating on Wednesday evening. And then all of Thursday, today is my fasting day, all of Thursday, I won't eat and I'll just have coffee in the morning and drink water. And then Friday morning, I pick up my meals again. start eating again. Um, People are really stunned when I tell them that I do this 36-hour fast and they talk about, "Oh, I could never do that." But honestly, it's not that difficult. Every fast, every time I fast gets easier than the week before. It's really not that hard. So I started my program in November of 2022. I took my last dose of metformin on November 7th, and my blood glucose readings started coming down out of those sort of outrageous numbers into the normal range, which I was stunned by. And then I lost 20 pounds, most of it right through the middle where I was carrying all that weight. Um, and then I saw my doctor in January and she was shocked. She couldn't believe it. And I told her what I was doing and she took me off the metformin. And that was the last dose of metformin I took. The thing is, it's not that hard to make good choices, but I find that the majority of people don't want to feel deprived. Note, I am not deprived at all. Cheese is delicious. Fat is delicious. And these are things that don't spike your blood sugar. Coffee without sugar is okay. I use cream and it's just fine. But the bigger issue is when people ask me, well, don't you miss pasta or bread? And I think, not really, because it's a no-brainer to choose between bread and medication. So which is it going to be? Do I want to go with bread and have to take medicine, or do I want to make these choices that are better for me and not take medication? And that's the route that I'm going. What do I wish I knew earlier? I can sum it up in 3 words. Eat less sugar. Find out where the sugar is in your diet and work really hard to eat less of it. That includes the things that turn into sugar in your body: pasta, potatoes. You do not need to have cereal in the morning, a sandwich at lunch, and potatoes at dinner. That's not going to end well for you. So eat less sugar and then move your butt. Please move. You cannot be sedentary. I don't want to work out all the time. I don't want to work out a lot of the time. But I also, again, the bigger point here is I don't want to be on medication. And these are things that I'm doing to stay off of medication. I really hate that people don't take this seriously enough until they are in crisis. I tell my kids now who are in their 20s to eat less sugar, to pay attention to what they're eating, because there have been studies that show people are pre-diabetic for years before diabetes shows up. If your doctor has said to you that you're pre-diabetic, now is the time. That's the yellow light. Now is the time to tap the brakes, to look at the way you're eating and the way you're exercising if you're exercising, and change up some things. All right. So if this is you, please come check out my program. You can go to goodenoughmother.com and there's a special tab there for Dear Diabetes, but it's time.